how about, instead of a fire-benning, we give a thank you, Jim? Yeah, that quote is never going to see the end for Vancouver Canucks fans, because today we are talking about another Jim in the organization that may or may not have done some pretty interesting work. Now, Jim Rutherford, of course, former Vancouver Canucks president of hockey operations, a guy who is 77 years old, and a guy who has had a long, long career throughout different NHL roles and as a player throughout different NHL teams. Jim Rutherford was a pretty good goalie back in his heyday, despite being 5'5", 152. Yeah, I get it. You can say these numbers are not amazing, but he had some shutouts. He had a bunch of wins. This was a guy that was a full-time starter for the Detroit Red Wings in the 70s and for the Penguins in that same time frame. There was a lot of history with Jim Rutherford, and the work that he done with multiple Stanley Cup winning teams as general manager over the years is the reason he is in the Hall of Fame. But for the past 5 seasons, Jim Rutherford has been the president of hockey operations for the Vancouver Canucks. He served as the interim GM as well at the end of the 2021 calendar year before Patrick Allvin was brought on. And I think it's fair to say that this era of Vancouver Canucks hockey was one of the most subliminally darkest eras that we could have seen, despite the fact that there was a genuine level of success that the Canucks had achieved, specifically in 2023, 2024. Aside this season, all these other years were pretty bad. The 2020-2021 year, the last year without Jim Rutherford, was terrible. The Canucks were getting torched by Montreal in the North Division. There was an outbreak of the virus, and Braden Holtby and Nate Schmidt was pissed off with everybody. It was just not a good time. Then Rutherford comes in, and there's an element of hope that gets introduced. There are some really interesting hires made, and Elias Pettersson actually plays some of the best hockey of his career in this time frame. However, things don't continue down a positive road, because shortly thereafter, in 2023, the Vancouver Canucks hang Bruce Boudreau, and they leave him out to dry. It's a stain on the organization, and it's a very negative outlook. Behind the scenes, you can say, there were some elements of the locker room and the personnel within that were questionable. And these elements are now being questioned a lot more nowadays compared to before. This leads us into 23-24, where the Vancouver Canucks have a really great season. They are 1 win away from the Final Four, and despite all of that, there is still an element of drama. What's going on with Elias Pettersson? What does the future of Quinn Hughes, the brand new captain, have in store? JT Miller is a top-tier guy, but how is he going to fit into the long-term plans of this team? Lo and behold, we understand what happens with Jim Rutherford's Vancouver Canucks shortly after. 24-25 comes, it's a disaster. 25-26 comes, it's even more of a disaster. JT Miller is gone, Quinn Hughes is gone. Elias Pettersson's still on the Canucks, and there are a number of things that you can talk about in regards to him and his hockey playing career, but there is this element of toxicity that is slowly seeping into the Canucks collective fan base and the media reporting as it pertains to the inner workings of this team. And I wanted to look at this quote posted by Taj. It's Kevin Woodley, who made an appearance on Halford and Bruff earlier on Monday, talking to ex-Canucks about the noise playing in the Vancouver market. He said that several of these ex-Canucks players specifically pointed to the outgoing president of hockey operations as the source of the noise. Now, when they say noise, what are they talking about? Well, they're talking mostly about the media coming in here, asking questions that maybe hit a little too close to home. There are stories going around of things that maybe the players would not necessarily like to have going around about them. And supposedly, you can say that Jim Rutherford is one of the biggest guys that allows that noise to seep into the media, period. Now, that's not a new thought, right? I mean, we've been seeing people talk about Jim Rutherford as one of the biggest blabbermouths in the NHL, a guy who can and probably will leak whatever is going on. He'll have interviews, he'll have his own say, and those articles will be published, or what he says ends up on podcasts. Maybe it's why taking a senior advisor governor role with the Vancouver Canucks this upcoming season is a much better way for Rutherford to spend his time. He already vacated his office in Rogers Arena, and the Sedins have taken over that president of hockey operations role. It's interesting because if you take a look at what Jim Behringer said, Jim writes for the RG and Full Press NHL. He said, when it comes to the Rutherford conversation, "I've been saying this for a while now, but yes, the outgoing president of hockey ops was part of the problem. He kept too many problems inside the room, bringing drama onto the team." Read here, and linked is the article that he wrote last month about the Vancouver Canucks and their leadership problem. You can see that Jim Rutherford is one of the main candidates when it comes to describing why everything is going down over here. Just take a look at some of these quotes. Alvin was the fall guy for the Vancouver Canucks' poorest season. Despite being the GM, it was in name only. Rutherford still wielded all the power. He had the final say on everything, as many found out when Vancouver traded Quinn Hughes to the Minnesota Wild. It was Rutherford who chose Miller over Bow. It was Rutherford who chose to give Pettersson, Besser, Garland, and Demko extensions when all 4 players entered their final years without contracts. Essentially destroyed this franchise. I totally agree with this. Probably why Tocchet didn't want to stay. You know, there is nothing that I personally, as an individual who makes YouTube videos talking about the stuff that I see online and the stuff that I watch on TV, there's nothing that I can say personally that will attack or maybe even make Jim Rutherford feel bad. Like, I'm just a random dude here in my bedroom talking about sports. But it has been talked about so much over the past few months that one of the biggest potential limiting factors of the Vancouver Canucks' ability to rebuild and move forward with this youth movement would have been the presence of Jim Rutherford. And not because, he can't draft or he can't acquire young players, but more so because of that culture. Seeing the Sedins step back in and having their experience and their preferences be put fully on display, the Sedins and Ryan Johnson wanting to instill a more positive environment without leaks to the media. These are all things that I don't think Jim Rutherford really tried to do much of as Vancouver Canucks president of hockey ops. And I'm not saying that he was a bad guy for not doing that, but he's 77 years old. The last team that he was on was a team that won back-to-back Stanley Cups. Obviously, you can tell there was a fire burning there for Rutherford to still be in the game. But the Vancouver Canucks were not a team that needed this type of leadership at the top, which is now why I'm saying it's a really great deal that Henrik and Daniel and Ryan Johnson are at the top of Vancouver. We'll see how it affects them heading into the next few years. But for now, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about this idea that Jim Rutherford, according to several ex-Canucks players, he was the source of most of the noise coming onto this team? Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.